Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, a sprinkling of philosophy, organizing psychology, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, Mr. E. So, Mr. E, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4IS. How are you, sir?
Yeah, pretty good. And we have a very interesting topic today. We have
hmm
inverted totalitarianism.
Yes, what a concept, eh?
Yeah, because I've just stumbled upon Sheldon Wolin and as well as Chris Hedges, because really Chris Hedges is the guy that got me onto this concept, and I kind of feel like this is a good concept that goes hand in hand or glove in glove with manufacturing consent, because they kind of deal in very similar themes.
Okay, so what is inverted totalitarianism,
Okay.
4IS?
Yeah. I'm happy to do my spiel because I did a little research and I'm happy to go into it now. So, inverted totalitarianism. In the early 21st century, political theorist Sheldon Wolin introduced the concept of inverted totalitarianism to describe a new form of authoritarianism emerged within ostensibly democratic societies, particularly the United States. Unlike classical totalitarian regimes such as Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia, inverted totalitarianism does not rely on overt repression or mass mobilization. Instead, it operates subtly through the consolidation of corporate power, the erosion of democratic institutions, and the pacification of the populace. This concept was further popularized and expanded by Chris Hedges, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist from the New York Times and a New York Times correspondent, and has drawn attention to its real world manifestations in American political and economic life. Now, Sheldon Wolin first articulated the idea of inverted totalitarianism in his seminal work, Democracy Incorporated, Managed Democracy and the Spectre of Inverted Totalitarianism in 2028.
Such a good title, isn't it?
Yeah.
Democracy Incorporated. Hello. Hello.
According to Wolin, inverted totalitarianism is a system where corporate power dominates the political sphere, but unlike classical totalitarianism, it does not seek to mobilize the masses. Instead, it thrives on political apathy, consumerism, and media manipulation. Wolin contrasts this with classical totalitarianism in three ways. The power structure, so in classical totalitarianism, the state dominates the economy. In inverted totalitarianism, corporations dominate the state. Public engagement, so the classical regimes demand constant political mobilization. In contrast, inverted totalitarianism discourages political participation, favoring low voter turnout and disengagement. And third, ideological control. Rather than overt propaganda, in inverted totalitarianism relies on corporate media and public relations to shape public opinion and maintain the illusion of democracy. Now we'll go into the Chris Hedges part. He has been one of the most vocal interpreters of Wolin's theory, using his platform to expose how inverted totalitarianism manifests in contemporary America. In a later introduction to a later version of Democracy Incorporated, Hedges argues that the United States has become a corporate state, where elected officials serve the interests of large corporations rather than the public. Hedges identifies several key features of this system: corporate capture of the government. Regulatory agencies are often staffed by former industry executives, and legislation is heavily influenced, if not outright written, by corporate lobbyists. The illusion of choice. Which elections are held, the range of political options is narrow, and both major parties are beholden to corporate donors. And then media as a tool of control. The corporate media focuses on entertainment and sensationalization, diverting our attention from systematic issues and discouraging critical thought. And then fourth, economic inequality and social control. As wealth becomes increasingly concentrated, the state uses surveillance, policing, and incarceration to manage dissent rather than address its root causes. Hedges also draws attention to the environmental consequences of inverted totalitarianism, noting how corporations routinely undermine environmental regulations and dominate public discourse on climate policy. Basically, that it kind of degrades democracy, but more specifically, democratic institutions. That is the
Yeah.
purpose of inverted totalitarianism.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you keep the veneer of a democratic society so people feel like they have protection for their civil liberties because
Mm.
they're involved in the process and they make a choice, but it's a very highly curated choice, a choice between pre-selected puppets of the machine. And that's the way the inversion works.
Well,
It's not
well,
outright dictatorship, is it? It's choose your own dictator, like a Goosebumps story.
well, like let's look at the last election in 2024 for America. Like, I guess in a like let's take the classic line of there just being a narrow distinction between uh, the two major parties. Like if I remember correctly, like when Trump was talking about anything sort of foreign policy, he was saying, "Oh, well, we'll bring we'll bring peace to here, we'll bring peace to here, even if we have to bomb the hell out of them." But like, take that. Like, obviously, he's supposed to be the hawk in this scenario, which makes a lot of sense. But then, the other side of that, you would imagine would be a dove. So somebody who would be like, "Oh no, we shouldn't need to have to do that. We can. I'm sure we'll be able to find a diplomatic solution and be able to sort it out." But then you go straight to the DNC for Kamala Harris, and the first part of her speech wasn't, "Hey, my foreign policy is about bringing, peace to the Middle East." It was, "Well, we're gonna bomb this person, and we're gonna bomb this person, and we're gonna bring them hell." And I hate to break it to you, it was not hawk versus dove; it was hawk versus hawk.
Yeah, yeah, two sides of the same coin, really. But like that's the two-party system, right, of America, which is the illusion of choice. But it's got nothing to do with that at all. It's a very narrow form of political selection. And as much as, Westerners think that they enjoy complete freedom and autonomy in their liberal societies, the only difference between the American two-party system, objectively, and one-party communist China is there's two parties in the American race and there's only one in the Chinese race. Like, that's it. Like, honestly,
Yeah.
they
Uh,
have two options and the Chinese have one. You want to get into Chinese politics, then join the Communist Party and rise through the ranks. You want to get into American politics? Like, honestly, want to get into
hmm.
American politics? Join one of the two major parties and get into the race. And like, there's always jokes in America, always jokes about, oh, why would you even vote for an independent anyway? Like, it is instilled in the hearts and minds of the people through
Hmm.
heavy indoctrination campaigns from, popular culture to actual established media and general conversation. Voting for a third party is useless. You might as
Yeah.
well not vote. You might as well not even like be part of the system. Just don't vote. Don't rock up and just stay home and watch TV or something like that and get pissed.
But
It's
also
useless.
brings you to the point to the one of the previous points it said in that spiel was about apathy and like oh well, it's useless to vote for a third party, therefore you can't change the system, therefore why even bother?
Why
Like,
even bother? Why go there? Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, like it's just because I have read Manufacturing Consent, and Like I can just see so many parallels with this.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and it's
And
all about controlling the conversation. Controlling the conversation, controlling the way people think about a certain issue by, setting the boundaries
yeah,
in order to produce consent for whatever it is the establishment wants, whatever the central party wants, the actual totalitarian regime that's in control. But like with this is very particular,
mm,
which is unfortunately, I think, not what was akin to what was going on in the 20th century with that form of totalitarianism, which
mm,
was, it was very obvious who was in charge.
mm,
You had some dictatorial figure and their central network, their core membership that really were controlling things, and everybody came to them and made alliances with the core party, the in-group. But
mm,
here, in inverted totalitarianism, the game is there is a corporate elite, a circle that's in motion, it's moving. There are some people that come in, there's some people that go out. And you really can't put faces to names. You don't exactly know who's in on this actual control of the political sphere at all times, because you can literally buy your way in as a corporation. You've just got to, as you described, have lobbyists in the right sections and
mm.
control policy and control the right people. And then you can control everything from afar. And you can have certain elements in society that you also buy off. So university establishments that control intellectual thought, media organizations that control public discourse. And then you control literally politicians themselves by buying them off.
Yeah,
And then you can control the political discussion as well, like what's acceptable to be talked about in political discourse, and what's going to actually shape the standards of that society. And it's all done through corporate takeover style means. I think
yes,
one of the most important decisions in recent American history for that exemplifies this theory better
mm,
than a lot of other things would be that Citizens United case. So the Citizens United case was that Supreme Court decision that allowed there
mm.
to be basically no cap on political donations in American
Right,
politics. And that's where
yeah,
you get things like the super PACs and all that sort of
yes,
stuff.
yeah, yeah,
So like before that, there was more of a constraint on like overtly how much you could spend on politics in America.
mm,
But like since then, they've changed the system, and basically there's no limit. You can set up a super PACs system, which is like a political organization that you donate money to, and then they can put money into backing certain campaigns. Maybe not exactly politicians themselves, but like campaigns that then will go on to lobby directly politicians.
yeah,
And so like there is really no limitation. And now in a system where there really is no limitation, you have like, Kamala Harris, the radical centrist for IS. When she like the day after she's announced, the Democrats raised, what was it, $250 million, was it? Wasn't it like
yeah.
$250 million like that for her
Okay,
campaign, like in
okay,
a couple of days? And like regular people,
okay,
which is what the democratic system is supposed to be about, right? You want a political voice, you want to do something, run for office. Yeah.
yeah,
Get a ticket and you'll be on the ballot. No one
yeah.
can get in on that now for IS. It's gone. Gone.
Okay, I do want to pull you up about something. Okay,
Yeah.
so I know what being radical left is. I know what
Yeah.
being radical right is. What's a radical centrist history?
A radical centrist are the corporate elite that have stooges in politics, middle of the road puppets that are perfectly curated. They've been controlled by an entire PR crew, and they're
Right.
manufactured politicians that keep the economy as stable as possible. So the corporatists that have taken over many of the governments around the world can continue to reap profits of the entire global system. So these radical centrists get in and, like a bull terrier, hold positions of power, and they paint the evil left as like an extreme and the evil right as an extreme, and then they push everybody towards the center. They're radical because once they're like a dog with a bone. Once they get their teeth and sink it into power, that's it. And they completely towing the extreme centrist party line. Like, look at, like have to use Kamala Harris again.
Okay.
Once she got announced after Biden fell out, because he literally was, for all public appearances, was basically losing his coherence. He was senile, basically.
Yeah.
And like, that was just way too much, even for a radical centrist who just has to read off some palm cards. Like, she got in, she was announced on the ticket, and they wouldn't let her talk to anyone for like 2 months or 3 months. She was on lockdown in radical centrist camp, boot camp, and they were trying to teach her how to respond to stuff like a robot. And I guess that's what the radical center is. They've just figured out how to keep power for the corporate elites, this inverted totalitarian corporate takeover of government, liberal democratic societies. And they control it with absolute impunity.
Yeah.
And I say that because, isn't it interesting that there is already a word for this type of stuff, but like, people use it and probably wouldn't describe it like this, but this is the exact same time when old school totalitarianism ended and neoliberalism started. It was the end of the Cold War, basically, the end of the Soviet Union, and neoliberalism raises its head, and then we have inverted totalitarianism. So, like, there is no opposition to the corporate state anymore. Sorry, free market capitalism, and then all of a sudden neoliberal ideology takes over, and we have an actual corporate takeover of liberal democratic societies in the West, the ones that are supposedly free societies, free of, authoritarian regimes, supposedly.
Freedom for who, right?
Yeah, freedom for who? That's right. Yes.
But like, just to kind of link all of those things in like concepts, like, you could probably start with something like in manufacturing consent, like the idea of the magnifying glass. So that was the one where it's not necessarily in, the 5 filters of manufacturing consent. The magnifying glass, it isn't, what the spectrums and what is talked about within a certain topic. So, say within an election campaign, an incident happens like, the Tampa scandal, like, are immigrants and babies being thrown overboard? This incident happened within an election. We, us in the media have to talk about this. Is it going to be a massive thing within the election? So the magnifying glass in the manufacturing consent is, well, what we're going to focus on, what the media is going to focus on, is, the Tampa scandal and, foreign policy within this election cycle. So what the magnifying glass does is it basically frames the topics or frames the issues that are going to be discussed. It's not really going to control anyone within those topics. So you could have someone that's saying, hey, this is obvious culture war bullshit, compared to somebody else who says, oh, well, no, we have to protect our borders and patriotism. But what's important for manufacturing the consent is that magnifying glass, and the audiences and everyone's glued to that topic. Then I guess that kind of goes hand in hand where, if you've got everyone talking about foreign policy, you can go to a career politician, a radical centrist, as you were saying, and if there are lobbyists that, majorly input into a party's certain policy points about X, Y, and Z, then you can kind of see how you can curate when it's talking about and what's that ends up being in the legislation. It kind of just goes hand in hand. And yeah, I can just kind of see the similarities, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, well, especially if they're controlling the conversation so well,
Yeah,
like is insinuated by this form of inverted totalitarianism, because like totalitarianism itself is very overt. It's very easy to see like who's in charge. That's actually the point of it, is to make sure that everybody understands that, and not only understands it but believes it too. It
mm,
believes it so much it becomes part of their mantra. It becomes part of their identity. And
yes,
like a lot of the stuff that was done in totalitarian societies were to produce citizens, like not only, the eugenics and social engineering, which they were into anyway, but like producing the perfect citizens who don't think for themselves, but are able to do what is required by the supreme leader or the party to advance them as a collective, as a group. The funny thing about the inverted totalitarian model is that, yeah, it's in the shadows. So you don't really know who you're subscribing to, but the identity is your identity and your mantra, the soul that you are embodied with in that system is one that comes from a very corporatized world. You are trained to be a good consumer, whether that is a
mm,
consumer of actual commodities and services or whatever that help feed that machine and help that collective keep going, or you're actually consuming, like you were talking about, the conversation.
yeah,
The conversation that they are curating on a daily basis. It is, a well-known topic in manufacturing consent
yeah,
that, you know, okay, there might be independent journalists out there that really see themselves as outside of the mainstream media. But at the start of the news cycle day, as the sun rises on the east coast of America, and
mm,
the New York Times and the Washington Post and whoever else starts writing up the headlines for the day, everybody around the world looks to these people and they're like, oh, they're talking about this. I don't want to miss out on trending or being topical. So I'm at least going to mention what they're talking about. I'm not going to agree with it, but I will talk about this issue because it's on everyone's lips and people probably want to know my opinion anyway. And so, like, that's how the conversation,
mm,
public discourse is shaped by a couple of or a handful of giant media organizations that are controlled by corporate interests, and everybody has to jump in on the conversation. Whether they agree with it or not, or are critical of it, take up an oppositional stance to it, they are dragged into that conversation. And that is exactly how a totalitarian regime works. There is a set conversation, they've got propaganda points, and whether you like it or not, you're forced into that conversation because either one, you want to debate people about it, you want to discuss it, so you are across what's happening in
yeah,
your totalitarian regime, and you don't want to be an outsider,
mm,
or you definitely don't want to look like a black sheep who's not having the same conversation as everyone else because you will be ostracized or they'll call you out on it. They'll call you out and then like you'll be thrown into a gulag or something like that. So like the conversation controlling in the, original totalitarianism, let's say, has like, very direct ramifications. You'll be taken away by the secret police or you'll be thrown in prison or something like that if you don't, you know,
yeah,
uh, if you don't carry the party line, the official propaganda of the party. But like here, it's like if you don't talk about it, fine, don't talk about it. But no one's ever going to hear you anyway. because the conversation is controlled through a corporate media. Now, the really interesting thing that I find is when it comes down to the old F word here, like, let's just be honest about what we're talking about. I think in the traditional totalitarian sense, we should be talking about fascism.
Yeah.
And fascism, as Mussolini had envisaged it, was a movement he thought, as it politically developed, because it didn't start off as a political philosophy or an ideology, but as he saw it, was the merging of the capitalist class and the state. The state had the power, but like the capital controlled the economy and was necessary in order to kind of produce a strong society built around the nation state. And you enveloped the capitalist class and the capitalist system into that nation state to make it this formidable force. And he called that corporatism. Fascism had a name, another name, a C word, and it was called corporatism. And like, that's exactly what inverted totalitarianism is talking about. He's talking about the coming together, the merger of the state and the corporate sector. But like, I'm assuming, and like, as this has been described, it's kind of the corporates that are really actually at the helm. The state is more of a vehicle for them to wield their power, which is the inversion. It's a very interesting dynamic.
No, I'm glad you kind of brought that connection, because I'm not sure whether the viewers or the listeners are aware, but in some of your recent streams, you've actually been going into what was it? The freedom stations, the news stations, but that America has throughout all of the different countries. So
USAGM,
yes,
which is the name of the agency that the American state basically funds in order to produce foreign media agencies to spread American propaganda. And they do that through the two agencies, Voice of America and the Broadcasting Organization for Cuba. Those are the two. And Voice of America is the one which you were talking about. Has Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, and Radio Free Middle East or something like that. And there's like the major continents are kind of covered there.
Yeah, and that image that gets stuck in my brain was the one with what was it? Was it Cuba? The one for Cuba, and they were talking about Fidel Castro, and it's like, oh, this guy was such a bad man. He did this, he did that, and then the whole time, like, all they show is like him with other people, like cutting wheat with scythes, like in the fields, and like him shaking hands with people and stuff like that. And I was just sitting there, I'm like, well, if you wanted to show him as a bad man, shouldn't you have used better footage? What's going on here?
Yeah, it's so good, isn't it? Yeah. Because like, and like the really interesting thing about the broadcasting agency, like specifically for Cuba, like the Voice of America takes on like every other continent. So like, the entirety of the world's population, basically, to spread their American propaganda. And then there's like just one other section just dedicated to Cuba, like smashing the Cuban people with American propaganda. So it's broadcasted from America, like across the sea to Cuba. And like any, I guess, resident or a citizen over there that has like a dish or some way of picking up the Cuba broadcast can listen to American paid by the American taxpayer, can listen to American propaganda there that like just talks smack about Fidel Castro and the Cuban government, while sending like broadcasting pictures of him literally down with his sleeves rolled up, helping working class Cubans harvest sugarcane. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
I was looking at that. I'm like, come on, like, can't you at least show I don't know, some real footage of him shooting someone? Like, at least at least have your image match what you're saying.
Yeah, it was horrible propaganda. But like, this is like outside of the Cuba one, let's go back to the Voice of America one.
Yeah.
I think it's important that you brought it up, is that this is backed by the American taxpayer, And the point of this is Voice of America works kind of in cahoots, I guess you would say, with USAID, or what used to be USAID, to spread American culture around the world and undermine governments and countries that are trying to seek their national development with liberation movements and political organizations that aren't down with American liberal values, like the values for freedom and democracy being the American way, i.e., opening yourselves up for American corporations to come in and attack or extract labor from you or your resources from you. So these organizations talk smack about foreign governments paid for by the American taxpayer, so American corporations can go into a stable country to do business.
Yes.
Like, talk about, like, that's it. This is the corporate state passing policy that the American taxpayer pays for so they can do globalist business. Absolutely incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And that's why I said, like, it goes hand in hand with neoliberalism. That is neoliberalism right there.
Yes. And I guess I'm just thinking, because, like, the whole point of inverted totalitarianism is that it's deliberately supposed to be hollowing out these democratic institutions. So obviously, like, if we're talking from, say, Reagan all the way to now, with what Trump is doing, as well as I guess what Elon Musk eventually did with Doge, and if we've gotten to the point of hollowing out institutions where we're trying, we have a billionaire that is famous for being a big business personality, and then you have the head of Tesla and the head of a big business, and they end up trying to treat a government institution as a business which is basically what Doge was. Like, are we not surprised that there's almost been an acceleration of getting rid of democracy? Like, it's almost, it makes sense that this bin fire that we've kind of been accelerating towards has been the direct cause of inverted totalitarianism. Like, maybe the question I'll have at the end of this, me thinking out loud, is, well, is Trump a consequence of inverted totalitarianism?
Yes, I think that he is, as in, like, the linear progression. So the march through history from Reagan to now has given us, another Republican in the never-ending change between, okay, it's the Democrats' turn, and now let's have a Republican for a few years. So, like, it was going to be a Republican of some sort. But, like, Trump is an interesting phenomenon that I think actually is a bit of a threat to the inverted totalitarian kind of system.
Right.
In a sense that, he is, I believe, as he claims to be, or his red MAGA strategists would claim him to be, a populist. And a populist is outside of that system. Populists aren't radical centrists. They aren't the centrists that went through political school and were trained by armies and armies of PR teams and political scientists to produce the stability required to continue the expansion of the capitalist system.
Yeah.
Trump is very dangerous in that regard. And I think that's actually kind of what's happening at the moment. Like, Trump is kind of beholden to the neoliberal world order as it has been to a certain degree because it suited the capitalist class. But, like, they also want to see a little bit of change. I think in my theorizing with the way the global politics is going, neoliberalism is over, and we're actually going to move towards something that's more overtly authoritarian. And so,
actually, sorry to just cut you off. Maybe the more apt um, analogy for inverted totalitarianism is you can see, rather than the progression that led to Trump with inverted totalitarianism, I think you can see the progression with inverted totalitarianism from, say, something like Bill Clinton to George W. Bush with the Patriots
Yes.
Acts.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
that is very much, you could definitely say, inverted totalitarianism linking up with manufacturing consent, because you don't get the inverted totalitarianism and the crackdown to the war on terror unless you had the manufacturing consent talking point of weapons of mass destruction.
Yes, yes. And we're seeing like a version of that already. Or
Mm.
like we've just seen that recently with Iran. Like it's like, did the Americans and like their allies never learn this one when like the Americans claim that somebody's got weapons and everyone's like, I don't know. We can't find any of evidence of that. Do the attack now. Like, I thought we would have learned this type of stuff. So that is definitely a weapon in the arsenal of American imperialism and
Yeah.
their desire to impose their will physically and violently on people that don't basically toe the line. People that put up a little bit of resistance are a danger and a threat and need to be dealt with. So that type of stuff was done, I think, at the behest of the corporate machine under somebody like Bush, because
Mm.
they were still very establishment. But like Trump is, doing Trump kind of thing, which is he's Mr. Deal and he wants to make sure that he has the ultimate upper hand when he's bringing different parties to the negotiating table. He can tell, he's not rail that he's sorted out their mess, so they need to, calm down a little bit, and then he can
Mm.
tell Iran that whenever he feels like it, he can completely destroy them if he wants to. But like he's like the phenomenon that is Trump, like the reason that the popularism has started, that this populist fervor
Yeah.
that has started across the liberal democratic world, I think is a result, as is what you're saying, I believe as well, is like kind of a result of decades of inverted totalitarianism, i.e. decades of neoliberalism. So stuff like austerity measures,
Yeah.
disregard for the local population, and corporate all the way. Like, like the mantra for the last 50 years has literally been if the rich get richer, we'll all do better.
Yes.
All boats rise with a rising tide. Like all of that bullshit, like, trickle down economics.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of that stuff was the mantra of this inverted totalitarian takeover, which is like, hey, just, if all the corporations do well, you'll all be fine.
Yeah.
You'll do well with better scraps off the table kind of thing. And
Yeah.
so like I think people are starting to see that doesn't happen. And like people, and this is the unfortunate reality with someone like Trump, people are kind of like, actually, you know what? Give us give us real totalitarianism, please. Cause like we prefer the in your face stuff, because at least we know what we're dealing with. And that's the real phenomenon. Like you can see liberals like really scratching their head when it comes to Trump. They're just like, but like, he does all of the wrong things politically. He's literally politically incorrect.
Yeah.
What do
Yeah.
you people want? And like people are sick of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
People are sick of it.
No, no, yeah. The more I think about it, I think the idea of Bush and the weapons of mass destruction being much more of aligning with inverted totalitarianism, whereas yeah, the I guess Trump and the iconic line from his original like 2016 campaign of draining the swamp. The whole point of draining the swamp is that, hey, the back and forth between the Dems and the Republicans, and they're not really being that much of a difference between the two of them. I know I'm the game changer. I'm the disruptor, and I'm going to completely change the game. And yeah, rather than being inverted totalitarianism, I'm going to be straight totalitarianism. And along with my little mate, Mancius Molbug over here, I'm going to be what was it, a corporate king. And
CEO King.
CEO King. I'm sorry, apologies. Malcius Molbug. CEO King and rule over America. I'll find a third term. I'll find a fourth term. All of a sudden, I'm shaking hands with my mate Xi Jinping, being president for life.
Yeah, yeah. It'll be Trump, Ping, and Putin hanging out until, and they're all around the same age as well, hanging out until their dying days, ruling over their little empires, ruling over their little totalitarian empires. And, it seems like, and I've theorized this a lot in my content, my streams, it seems like this is a natural progression of capitalism itself. That it's reached a certain point now with the development of the means of production, things have become very, very centralized in fewer and fewer hands, fewer and fewer corporate hands. And so you need a lot of money, a lot of finance behind whatever economic enterprise you're undertaking anyway. So it can really only be done by massive, massive corporations. And democracy isn't really required, in the sense that we have it with universal suffrage. You don't really, in a world where corporations monopolize on things more and more, and their power becomes more and more centralized into, like I said, fewer and fewer hands. You don't really want people to have power in a system like that, because if people do vote for the wrong populist, not someone like Trump, because Trump is a populist, but he's not a people's populist. And I think this is exemplified in the fact that they've just passed the big, beautiful bill, and it's full of things that just give absolute, tax breaks and wonders to not only the richest people, but the corporate sector, and it completely screws over working people. So he's not a real, populist in the sense that, he can whip up some popular energy, but he's not, in there for the actual people. But if you get a real populist, a populist that actually platforms on something like let's eat the rich, and then comes in and's let's get the barbecues going, that's really dangerous.
Yeah,
that's really dangerous for a system built on corporate power. And I don't think inverted totalitarianism is going to cut the mustard anymore. It's too vague. It's not on the nose enough. Yeah. You actually need a strong man to come in and control your population, if you know what I mean, for us.
Right, yeah.
And that's where I think capitalism is going to kind of save itself. And as interesting as inverted totalitarianism is, and it's a great way to understand the world that has gotten us to this point where we are, and, might carry us into the next decade or so, I don't foresee it hanging around too much longer, because we're not going to need the inverted part anymore, if you know what I mean. That's an unfortunate analysis.
Well, yeah, and that kind of brings us towards the, techno-feudalism, right? Because if inverted totalitarianism comes from making democracies into corporate states, and those that are running the corporate states are those that control the data, control the means of getting value within society, then you're kind of screwed. Yeah, if we're in techno-feudalism and they're the ones that are kind of controlling the data, then yeah, you can kind of see where the totalitarianism eventually brings. Because if you've got people that control the data and they are able to control, what you think, how you think, and everything in between, then especially when you're online, and rather than you going to this vendor and that vendor, if it's owned by Bezos, if it's owned by Elon Musk and anyone else with OpenAI and the LLMs, then there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah, and I think it's really scary, and it's a good point in terms of totalitarianism, one of the hallmarks of it is like absolute surveillance of your population. And, it may even just be completely a logistical conversation at this point that in the 21st century, because of the rise of internet technologies, because of the rise of the information age, because of the digital highways, it has never been easier to surveil your population. You don't need to really have a system of control like the secret police running around everywhere, or having like an inverted system where like the corporate elite control people, control institutions in the shadows through like silent takeovers and lobbying to get their agenda. They can directly, and we've talked about this a lot.
Yeah.
They can directly modify people's behavior because they're collecting data on them through the corporate system and now through the state. And like that is one thing that the Trump administration has been doing a lot of, is employing tech bros to come in and consolidate government information to assist with ICE raids, to assist with surveilling people on the street through various facial recognition technologies and linking information from various data sets and government databases. So like it is the merger of the corporate and the state surveillance systems that is going to allow a transition from an inverted, in the shadows, covert totalitarianism into just full-blown totalitarianism. Like you don't need to be all covert about this anymore. If anyone does anything, like protests, like a bunch of students protest, or like a bunch of people protests in a sanctuary city somewhere in America to stop people from their communities being deported or picked up off the street and thrown into vans, you've got all the data on them and you pick them up too and throw them in the back of a van and take them off somewhere.
Yeah.
So like, we've had a bit of inverted. Now it's time for, now it's time for original. You've had inverted totalitarianism. Now we're going to bring it back to totalitarianism classic for all of the old school out
and
there.
And now for the re-release of totalitarian regime. You thought you had Hitler. You thought you had Stalin. Now bring on the tech bros, totalitarianism.
Yeah, I know, right? Bring on Mark Zuckerberg and the tech bros to watch your every movement, backed up by the CIA.
Oh, okay, I'm calling it here. In about 40 years' time, being zucked is like you being thrown to the tech bro gulags.
Yeah, pretty much. Being like cut out of your social media channel. That is your only form of communication with the outside world because we'll all live in a box.
Yeah.
And once you're cut off, they'll cut off your AI best friend, your AI partners, and your AI businesses. And like you'll have nothing. You'll have no way of surviving. And then you'll just kind of fade away out of everybody's minds, and you'll soon fade from existence because they'll just cut you off from the digital world. That's a techno-feudal horror show right there for us.
God, don't need Black Mirror for that, eh? And with that depressing note, that goes where we now move on to our last segment, which is what's that synthwave art? So, Mr. E, what do you think this one is?
Is that synthwave tech bro out there to basically control the world? I can see, it looks like fighter jets and drones and stuff in the background. There's various vehicles, I don't know, kind of deconstructed. So maybe it's like a dystopian tech bro that's come to take over the world. I don't know, you tell me.
Yeah, so the prompt for this one is when inverted totalitarianism and the tech bros take over the land and sea in society.
The land and
sea. Land, air, and sea in society.
Air, land, air, and sea, okay. All right, from the river to the sea, 4AS. Oh. They're coming for you. Very nice.
And with that, everyone, thank you for tuning in, and Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And remember to keep thinking and keep learning. And to sign us off, I'll give it over to you, Mystery.
Thank you very much, 4ES, and to all of you out there. Please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.